So I'm so excited for Johann to be joining us today. You all are in for a treat. Johann Besserer is the Executive Director of Intercultural Outreach Initiative, or IOI, a nonprofit based in Florida that runs carbon negative study abroad and volunteer programs. Johann founded IOI in 2006, and since then, the organization has over $5 million invested in 84 on-site projects supporting socio-environmental infrastructure developments. So that includes soccer fields, greenhouses, field research equipment, coral nurseries, community gardens, and more in Cuba, Costa Rica, and Galápagos. IOI has been recognized and is in the process of or being reviewed for awards by the Education Abroad and GoAbroad for their work on sustainability in education abroad, and by the InterAmerican Development Bank and Ecuadorian governments for their work in food sovereignty and community development. So, no big deal. Just getting recognized by international governments. And then Johann is based in Hawaii, and IOI's programs currently run in Galápagos. He holds a PhD in marine sciences from the University of Miami. And we're going to start with kind of an interview style presentation and then open it up to all of you for questions. So I'm really excited. So maybe Luke, that's where we'll stop sharing. Perfect. Thanks. That way we can actually see each other's faces. So Johann, IOI runs carbon negative study abroad and volunteer programs. Can you tell us how you manage to do all that?
Yeah, thanks for the very juicy intro there. It sounds pretty good when you say it out loud in a row like that. How do we do it? We are on a path, obviously, like everybody. Maybe we're on it much sooner than many. The last NAFTA in this year, post-pandemic, we've noticed that the industry is turning hard towards sustainability, which is great. And in the past, especially in the education abroad side of our work, it was always like we go to these conferences and what are we? Are we a provider? Are we not really, because we're a nonprofit organization. And it was always, oh, you can't take these numbers working with volunteer organizations or whatever. What do you mean you only do 10 volunteers at a time? Well, we need to bring in like 100 a month. I'm like, yeah, we can't do that. And it was always like, oh, it's nice, the environmentalists are here too. We kind of got a pat on the head. And this time around, it's everybody came to us and everybody was interested and everybody has SDG goals and compliance issues and nobody has a clue of how to get there. And we claimed we were on our way of getting there. I think in 2017 it was when we started with this. And we come by it honestly, really. As we are an environmental NGO, that's how we were started. I started IOI in 2006 as a graduate research program, really. I did my graduate research in the Galápagos, and fisheries were declining and were unsustainable. And as a solution, at the time it was very en vogue to start ecotourism, to get fishermen to be, get people to look at the sharks with dive tourism, particularly at the time, rather than shark fin and kill the shark. And you can only, sell that once, and you can sell the dive tour 10 times in a row on the same day. And, little did we know, IOI, that's kind of our roots. But along with WWF, Conservation International, and all the big guys, Charles Darwin Foundation, all of them that are in the Galápagos, very concentrated NGO environment there due to its popularity and uniqueness. We are open Pandora's box, of course. Now nobody fishes anymore. Sometimes it's hard to find fish in the fishing town. And, ecotourism, which then, of course, turned into something that is tourism in the ecosystem, has done a lot of change to the Galápagos and is now the major problem of the Galápagos. That being said, mass tourism has been held out of the Galápagos, and it's all local owned. There's a high social impact. In many ways, it's very much a sustainable tourism. But of course, it's not perfect. And of course, it stresses the environment, mainly due to national issues like taxation, redistribution of welfare, because the infrastructure can't keep up with the increase of human population and visitation. So that's all the backdrop to how do we become carbon negative. We're working on those systems with the community. That's our development aid side, which is kind of what the NGO turned into, not necessarily marine conservation institution, which it was conceived as, we realized sooner than some maybe that environmental protection only goes via sustainability, i.e., whenever you want to change or protect the environment, you have to go through the economics of things and through the people. People have to change things. So it's all about social issues and economic issues, which is where we work mostly. So all of our projects that we do on the ground are community decided and community driven and run with local institutions. Hence, maybe a somewhat biased recognition by the Ecuadorian government. We work with them. So we work with the state government and the local municipality and various branches of the national government, such as the Ministry of Agriculture and the Ministry of Environment, most notably the National Park in the Galápagos. And we work with them to execute their national plan of development. Ecuador has one of the most progressive constitutions actually in the world. It was just recently rewritten under the Buen Vivir concept, if some of you know that maybe from Latin America, the socialist revolution, a new socialism of the 21st century. In the wake of Chavez in Venezuela, many countries changed their ways a little bit and continue to do so, even though it's kind of regressing a little bit recently, particularly also in Ecuador. But a lot of social changes came to Latin America, especially the Bolivarian states in the northwest of South America. And the constitution was rewritten to include nature as a judicial person, i.e., anybody can go to court in Ecuador in the name of nature. So nature has a judicial person in court, which of course brought many changes to the Galápagos. Amongst them was that nonprofit organizations were no longer in charge of the Galápagos, basically. I mean, technically, we're always doing consulting, but really, there was so much expertise there that there was way more horsepower in the NGO sector than there was in the local government. So we, from the beginning, started to try and get away from that and work with local population in terms of environmental education and social development in order to fertilize the sector and do institution building in the Galápagos. That's where our study abroad comes in. We brought in education institutions to help with these programs and to give the expertise, because really IOI, it was an organization started by me. We have 10 very dedicated staff, but we're by no means expert in how to run a country, basically. And Galápagos is very separate from the rest of Ecuador and runs as an almost independent state with its own immigration and biosecurity and tourism. Everything's very separate. So it runs almost like an independent country. And what do we know? Very little. What we know is that we can bring people together. We brought in the expertise from our university partners to help. And then from our end, we have students and volunteers help us power our projects that we run in cooperation with the government. So it's, in the end, we are a nexus organization between the local government and the international academia and knowledge. And we also are a bridge, ironically, between the Ecuadorian government and the Ecuadorians, since that new, now no longer socialism government wants to turn things back around and take away some certain programs and took away the power of running the islands from the NGOs. It kind of freed us up to work as a mediator almost, to explain, since we're working with the government, to the population of why certain things make sense, or to tell the government what people need through our research in order to grow. How did we, that's a very long story. How did we make all of that relate to carbon? Well, we were the first ones to start working in agriculture for food sovereignty reasons. Amy mentioned earlier that we got recognized for I forgot what the name exactly was for the award. But we got recognized for development in the pueblo in Ecuador. And this kind of blew up, and the recognition came in with the pandemic, as food sovereignty wasn't a given anymore when the supply ships stopped coming to the Galápagos. But long before that, we started working from a food sovereignty point of view, and then realized that there was potential as I was personally also developing more into that direction from my teaching, and from my personal life. I live on a farm here in Hawaii. Realized that the big elephant in the room for international education and for us as a volunteering organization is that we fly to these places, right? For us, we bring people in from the outside. Everybody flies to the Galapagos. I saw Sebastian will talk about how to measure your own emissions on the office. That's for us sort of like easy, in the Galapagos. You just look at the power meter and you kind of calculate it from there and run your programs pretty sustainably. We're a very small organization. This is a big deal in a big organization. But for us, it was rather easy. But for us, the big elephant in the room is, of course, travel to the Galapagos. With the sustainable agriculture programs that we've been running, we have been able to, in cooperation with Conservation International, calculate the footprint, not necessarily of our activities, but of produce shipped to the Galapagos. So any expansion in the Galapagos of the agricultural sector means a reduction in shipping to the Galapagos. Now, this is kind of a crutch, because obviously the program itself has the agriculture itself has other emissions in the Galapagos. But for us in a remote location like this, similar to where I live here in Hawaii, actually, if you only take the transportation emissions of produce, we already reduced more of shipping than our offices were emitting. So our stage 1 and stage 2 emissions were already covered by reduction in shipping to the Galapagos. We're currently working on the impact of, or not the impact, but rather the drawdown. I think that was a follow-up question, Amy. Sorry if I'm already leading into this. For regenerative agriculture, and I'll talk about what that is maybe in a minute if you're interested. So how we can actually make agriculture better for the environment. And with those increased reductions, we will then, draw down more carbon. Yet, again, it's very hard to calculate that in the field. How much carbon did we draw down in this forest patch, for instance? There's formulas. Yeah, one tree over 10 years is that many kilos or whatever, but it's very broad, depends on your climate, depends on the tree. And also, what if you're not reforesting? What if you're actually working the land, like agriculture, not just reforestation? Which is also, spoiler alert, the solution, in my opinion, to global climate change, which is why we're in this to begin with. Back to the education abroad side of this question, maybe. How do we do it? We're not quite there yet. We are currently still offsetting the flights, stage 3 emissions of our program. So we're offsetting those as best we can. And I'm not going to go into problems with offsetting. I'm assuming this group will know what they are. And we're trying to do our best to work with the best providers and calculate generously to offset enough of what we fly, so to speak, as an organization. But everything that's stage 1 and stage 2 emissions, we're insetting, but offsetting within our organization from our own programs more than we are emitting in those terms. And the long-term plan is that once we have the actual calculations from our regenerative agriculture program, to do the flights also in-house, i.e. not offset any longer, but inset from our sustainable agriculture, regenerative agriculture program, the stage 3 emissions, i.e. mainly flights for us to the Galapagos.
Yeah, that's actually
that was
perfect.
Like a super long monologue with
No.
in it. Oh.
No, it's a really good segue, because as I've mentioned, so Jake here actually and I and our colleague had done a presentation on carbon offsetting a number of months ago. And so this group knows a little bit about how not reliably good those programs are, to put it simply. And so you mentioned insetting. I wonder if you could help maybe explain the difference between offsetting insetting and onsetting?
Okay, I'll take the easy one first, which is the difference between offsetting and onsetting. To me, insetting is in-house offsetting. You know, we are offsetting the flights right at the destination in our programs. What you do contributes to offset what you're emitting. You obviously have an impact and emissions, but we're not letting you do that, calculate it, and then send money to some remote program to do something maybe sometime somewhere that nobody can really check, preferably in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and reforest, you know, 1 million acres, and you've read about it. And we sent $10 million over there and nobody knows what happened. That's the problem with offsetting. We're doing that right here, right now. While you're here, you're looking at it, you're contributing to it. You're doing it yourself, basically. You're the participant seeing and doing it. In-house offsetting.
Love that.
Onsetting, I'm not super familiar with the concept. I hope nobody's actively doing that because might put my foot in it now. I feel like it's almost a bit of a marketing term, but I'm said to be pretty crass in my statements, so I don't know enough about it to really shit talk it well.
That's
But I
fine.
feel like it's kind of the same thing as insetting that we're doing, in the sense that it deals with a localized strategy. You don't go to a big provider's offset it somewhere in Africa where, you know, it's cheap to grow trees, but it takes it local. It takes it small scale. It takes it to the source, and it takes it, I think, not directly to the carbon emissions themselves, but rather mitigation of the impact of the results of carbon emissions, if that makes sense. So we emit carbon into the atmosphere, there's climate change, then there's flooding in your coastal community or along your riverbeds. And so you work on mitigating the socioeconomic impacts of the damages resulting from carbon emissions.
Yeah,
So
love
it's
it.
the social side and small scale.
Yeah, thanks.
But again, I don't know exactly. It's not a super clear concept to me, the onsetting.
That's okay. That just means we've got more homework to do in going to find that out. I do want to ask you one more question before we open it up to the group. I'm gonna squash two together. So you mentioned regenerative agriculture. If you could kind of just tell us what that is and what IOI is doing to support it, and maybe with a focus on soil, because I remember learning about this earlier this year of just how integral and important soil is to the climate solution. That I wanted you to maybe share a little bit more about that with the group.
Okay, really broad question. So soil is what we use, a growth medium, obviously, for anything and everything on this planet. And what industrial agriculture is to destroy it, basically. Not to use a brand name, but Roundup is a very popular herbicide, and Roundup Ready crops can sustain it. So people spray it rather freely in order to kill weeds around what they grow, usually in large monocropping installations. So what it really does, though, is it doesn't necessarily burn down and kill the plant. It kills the soil, and therefore the plant dies. And so what we're doing on large scale is we're taking out the biomass that then decomposes to put carbon back into the soil. Carbon gets taken out by photosynthesis out of the atmosphere by combining water with energy from light and putting it as carbohydrates, releasing the O2 from the chemical reaction into the atmosphere. We know plants produce oxygen, but they also put sugar into the ground, which is basically fertilizer. So this is a very reductionist kind of explanation and quick one, but that's kind of how that works. And then if we stop doing that with the Roundup, basically we're taking out more and more nutrients until the soil can't give anymore. Then we need to put chemical fertilizers on top of it to put the nutrients that we've taken out back into it. Chemical fertilizers are very carbon intensive to produce. That's one side of it. The second side of it is water, which is why we have all these droughts, or rather the flooding after the drought is it's bare soil. It's whatever you're growing, and then it's bare ground, which means any sun or any wind will attack it rather harshly and will dry it out and will then, create dust, the Dust Bowl, the infamous Dust Bowl in the Midwest. When the winds come off the mountains or sweep down the plains, it takes half the soil it finds with it, because it's not held in place anymore when it's nice and wet. And there's no roots to hold it in place when it's covered with a cover crop or naturally weeds or pastures or meadows. So that is really the problem. And what regenerative agriculture does is it restores the soil. It regenerates the soil. It leads the soil to be more healthy and to uptake again dying plants, basically, and all the biodiversity that comes with it in the whole process of breaking down that biomass, that plant matter. In the process, as I briefly mentioned earlier, you draw down a lot of carbon into the ground, which is why regenerative or sustainable agriculture is highly carbon negative, including, yes, cows. Many people ask me that when I teach regenerative agriculture, and we say in the field, so to speak, we say don't throw out the cow with the feedlot. It's not the cow. It is the way we raise them that is the problem. It's not even the amount of cows. It's how we concentrate them and how we feed them and how we don't spread them out. Cows, ungulates, hoofed animals have a secondary benefit that not only fertilize the land, they also work it in with their hoofs. So it's kind of like a no-till tilling situation into the soil. So regenerative agriculture necessarily requires cows, or ungulates anyways, to have that nutrient cycle be complete. Cows upcycle grass, which we cannot eat, and they poop it onto the ground, which is fertilizer, and then they work it in with their hoofs. Best to do, actually, if we do manage it a little bit, it's called rotational grazing, so that we use an area and concentratedly lower down the weeds, fertilize it, and turn it over until it's very tilled everywhere, and then move it to another area. If you have 100 acres with one cow on it, that's not enough, because you don't really get a tilling effect that will benefit your agriculture after. But once you rotate a herd over a certain area, then you have fertile soil that did not get disturbed by tilling. Tilling also has an additional problem that it flips over a rather deep layer of soil, i.e. carbon that's further down in the soil gets flipped to the surface and then gets exposed to sun and wind again, with the water evaporating. So then you're kind of creating the first layer of problem that you now put down below. Now you have the good soil from the bottom having the same problem. So all of this will extend, the benefits of commercial and industrial agriculture, that we can run this successfully for, a generation or two, but we're coming to a point where most of our ag lands are becoming increasingly infertile. In fact, the FAO is calculating that we might have less than 50 harvests left if we continue with current practices globally in order to feed ourselves, until our fields won't give anymore. So we
But
really
we can resuscitate them, right?
Yes, we really don't have an option to change our ways. And in the process, in order to save ourselves the, future dinners, we can also save the climate crisis. It's very complicated to calculate at large scale, even more so than at small scale, in terms of, what our carbon impact is, or what our carbon negative impact is in terms of drawdown from agriculture. But various studies that you read, you can draw down up to 4 tons per hectare. A hectare is 4 acres. So a metric ton per acre, basically, by regenerative agriculture, by increasing the carbon content of the soil by 1%. A normal soil has about 5% carbon. Industrially degraded soils have about 1%, when they're depleted and cannot be farmed anymore. So if we only raised the carbon content of our current fields by 2% back to 3%, not like a forest floor of 5%. If you calculate that up on a global scale of all agriculture in the world, we would actually offset twice the amount we've emitted since the Industrial Revolution. So there is a solution right in front of our eyes that we could do, but we're not.
Yeah. Right.
So
That
did that answer the question? I don't know. I get on tangents when we talk about agriculture.
I love it. I
Oh,
no, I think that gives us a little bit of hope that it's really everything is relative, right? Like every degree, every inch, every percentage is an improvement and worth pursuing. I love that.
Absolutely. The
Yeah.
solution is there. It's not even that difficult. We just need to break the current ways in which we're doing it. And since agriculture, particularly in the US, also in Europe, are very industrialized, there's of course a lot of lobbying and interest in what products get sold to the farmer to use to solve the problem that wouldn't exist in the first place if they
Right.
weren't doing the industrial way.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
and so that's what we're trying to integrate more and more with our university partners in the Galápagos, and thereby substantially increasing the carbon drawdown there for stage 3 emissions.
Yeah.
Because for now, as I mentioned, we're doing it only by reduction of shipping, but this active process now by calculating the drawdown will then exponentially increase and hopefully no longer require offsetting in the long run.
Yeah.
That's a big goal, but we're more than one step there.
it's
Yeah.
wow.
Well, with that, I want to open it up in case anyone has any questions for Johann. Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Johann. This was super fascinating, and I know all of our community members will get a lot out of this. So I really appreciate you joining us and letting us record as well.
Of course, yeah, we're recording. Anybody watching this in the future, feel free to contact me if you guys want to know more about regenerative agriculture. Happy to talk about it. Happy to implement it on your campuses. Yes, not everybody has fields, but urban agriculture is going in the same direction and it plants the seeds, pun intended, for expansion later.
I love that, dude. So organizations, if you're looking for ways to inset, to do carbon insetting, talk to Johann and find out ways that you could do it on your campus. Love that.
On behalf of this team, Johann, I just want to thank you for your time today. It's really amazing information and happy to see a solution. So thank you.